And I'd just like to welcome Mr. Steven Hernandez, Mayor of Coachella, who's going to say a couple words.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and let me just, I want to give a round of applause to Tisolk and Brianna for organizing this. I think they've just done something very special, and that's to elevate the conversations in our communities.
Really, really grateful to have these panelists join us this evening. I want to go ahead and introduce our moderator, and then he'll take it from there. Mr. Baratunde Thurston. Baratunde holds space for hard and complex conversations with his blend of humor, wisdom, and compassion. Baratunde is an Emmy-nominated host who has worked for The Onion, produced for The Daily Show, advised the Obama White House, and wrote the New York Times bestseller, How to Be Black. He's the creator and host of How to Citizen with Baratunde, which Apple named one of its favorite podcasts of 2020, and for which he received the Social Impact Award at the 2021 iHeartRadio Podcast Awards. He is also a founding partner of the new media startup Puck. In 2019, he delivered what MSNBC's Brian Williams called one of the greatest TED Talks of all time. Baratunde is unique in his ability to integrate and synthesize themes of race, culture, politics, and technology to explain where our nation is and where we can take it. Baratunde serves on the boards of Build and the Brooklyn Public Library and lives in Los Angeles, California. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Baratunde Thurston.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. My next project's going to be How to Be Black in the Desert, which is just a listing of lotions. It's just oils and lotions and conditioners and things to keep the ashiness at bay. And if you're not laughing, it's okay to laugh. I won't tell anybody on social media that you did. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We're going to have a discussion, a conversation will involve you as well. And don't worry, we'll also define CRT and NFTs, and maybe that will change some of these poll results. We've got two great folks with us. I'm going to start here to my right. Angela Del Sol Varela is a social entrepreneur and climate activist, the founder and executive creative director of Solera Creative. She is connecting technology with earth restoration projects focused on conservation and climate adaptation using art and storytelling. Angela is an early adopter of blockchain and passionate about Web3 education and making the industry accessible to women and BIPOC folks. She is the lead steward of Sisu DAO, a community focused on supporting earth-positive projects by inspiring action through multimedia Web3 art collaborations, community events focused on wellness, and cross-disciplinary collaboration in ReFi, not DeFi. If you know what DeFi is, get up on this ReFi. We'll get to that. And crypto. We're introducing a whole new vocabulary. Warm welcome, please, for Angela. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be in Indio, California. I'm usually based in New York City and now in Mexico City, so it's a new landscape for me, and it's just really such a beautiful crowd and so diverse, and I think it's so important to have a diversity of thought, and in all of my work I've really done my best to connect dots where most people have never seen them. And as you mentioned, I'm very passionate about climate action, and that has really been my main raison d'être for my entire life, of how to give back to the earth. And through that, I've worked across technology, across philanthropy, always trying to connect philanthropy and technology. So I started a creative agency a few years ago to help transition us into sustainability before sustainability became a trendy word that just got greenwashed by a lot of brands and corporations, and worked on projects like Little Sun Campaign, which is a solar-powered lamp, which actually been around. All of this fantastic art really reminded me of the power of communication through art, by an artist called Olafur Eliasson, who you might know. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here and talk about all of these funny acronyms that might sound really strange, but we'll decipher them together.
We'll break them down.
Thank you.
Our other panelist, Khaled Beydoun, is a law professor, author, and public intellectual, serves as a law professor at Wayne State University, a scholar in residence at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University, and an associate director of the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights in Detroit. Professor Beydoun is author of the critically acclaimed book, American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear, and co-editor of Islamophobia and the Law, published by the University of Cambridge Press. His academic work has been featured in top journals including UCLA Law Review, Northwestern Law Review, California Law Review, the Harvard Civil Rights Institute, all the law reviews. Goodness. His insights have been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, BBC, ESPN. We got more acronyms for y'all. And he served on the U.S. Commission for Civil Rights for 3 years, earned a coveted Open Society Foundation's Equality Fellowship. And this just popped out to me, homie. We gotta talk about this. Has been named one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world, which Fox News calls the watch list. He's currently working on his third book, humble brag, examining Islamophobia as a global phenomenon. And in 2021, he was named an extraordinary professor by the University of Western Cape in South Africa. Joined the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice as a faculty member that very year. First question to each of you, and we got a little flavor of it from you, Angela, but anything that I left off the bio that you want to make sure this audience understands? And then do you have any connection to this desert? And if so, could you share what that is?
Sure. Wassalamu alaikum. So I actually study international studies, and I was very passionate about social justice my entire life. I'm an immigrant. I am originally from Colombia and came to the United States when I was 13. So race and social justice has kind of been a topic that I've never been able to escape because I've been between cultures. Grew up mostly in Washington, D.C., so politics was my bread and butter for many years, and I grew very disenchanted by it because I realized that a lot of creative people go into politics to change things and then they get caught up in the bureaucracy. And that's where I decided to use art and creativity and media as the medium to spread messages that I care for. And yeah, being here in the desert is incredible. I think the last desert that I was in my home country in Colombia, bringing solar lamps and water filters to indigenous women that are committing suicide because they can't have their children live in those situations, and extreme climate disasters that are quite hard to imagine. So when I think of the desert, I sometimes get those flashbacks of water scarcity, and I think a lot about water when I'm in the desert, but I also think about resiliency and ingenuity and what can be born out of necessity, and I think this place, from what I'm seeing right now, it's an example of that, so I'm really, really excited to be here.
Thank you. Khaled.
What's up, everybody? It's great to be here. This is a beautiful space. I feel like my credit score is too low to be in this room, but it's really exciting to be here. I'm from Detroit, and being from Detroit, we're always proud of being from that city, so I wear that on my chest, and it's something that is very dear to me. I'm Arab, man, so Arabs were originally from the desert. We're a nomadic, desert-dwelling people, a different desert, the Sahara Desert. I was born in Egypt, so I feel like I'm kind of at home being here. I should have rocked my thobe. It's Ramadan, so holy month for Muslims. So it's great to be here. I'm really excited to be in conversation. You got a tough challenge, brother, because bringing CRT and NFT together, you got some work ahead of you.
We're gonna do it with a little help from my friends. We're gonna get that done. And I'll answer that same question too, because I'm new out here as well. I grew up in Washington, D.C. Yeah, so I come from the Mount Pleasant neighborhood, if anybody happens to know where that is. Okay, so we gotta talk a little, see, friends, right? And I am actually, I kind of span these topics in some way. My mother was black, like me. I'm black, of course. My parents were black. But she was a computer programmer for the federal government in the United States. She was also very active politically. She embedded this Nigerian name in me to try to reclaim this connection that was stolen by the economic system that built so much in this country. And she just made it very clear that I should be always questioning authority, expressing my creativity, and also taking advantage of new technologies, because that helped lift her up, and she saw it helping lift me and my older sister, Belinda, up. My connection here is getting deeper. My wife and I bought a property here. We're moving to the desert, thus the lotion comment is real. It's not a joke, it's facts. So I'm becoming your neighbors, so thank you very much. Raise your hands if you live out here. All right. Well, thank you for welcoming me, and raise your hands if you're visiting. Show some love to the visitors. I mean, a little more love. That was a skeptical setup. Let me see their credit scores first. I don't know. So let's start with some definitions. And Khaled, I'll start with you. CRT, critical race theory, NFT, non-fungible tokens. Both of these three-letter acronyms are in the news with not a lot of clarity about what they mean, a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around them in some quarters, a lot of excitement and endorsement from others. Can you break down what is critical race theory, and how did you get introduced to it? What's your history with this idea?
So I'll try to be as brief as possible. It's hard for law professors, we can be long-winded.
I might regret the question.
But I'll start with but feel free to cut me off.
Okay.
But I'll start with the genesis of my interest in critical race theory and then delve into the definition of what the canon, what the discipline actually means. So I moved to UCLA Law School, and I chose to go to UCLA specifically because they had a concentration in critical race studies. Many of the pioneers of critical race theory taught at UCLA and still teach at UCLA. People like Kimberly Crenshaw, who's the mother of intersectionality, Cheryl Harris, who wrote a really important book, an article called Whiteness is Property. So I specifically chose to go to law school at UCLA because I was really intellectually smitten with this new discipline that was rising to the fore before anybody knew what CRT actually meant, right? I was moved by it because as a young kid, I was Arab and I was Muslim in Detroit, and every time I turned on the news and they were talking about my neck of the woods, the Middle East, talking about my religion, or talking about people who looked like me, it was always older white dudes who were the Middle Eastern experts, kind of like waxing poetic about a religion and about a people they knew very little about, number one. And second, we're demonizing our population. I wasn't a good kid, right? I got in a lot of trouble. I wasn't the best student, but I had realized really early on that this wasn't right, that I wanted to do something. I wanted to be part of the enterprise of rewriting and sort of undoing these misrepresentations about who Muslims and people of color were. So critical race theory was this exciting new language that enabled me to do that. I'm going to try to define critical race theory in 1 or 2 minutes, and I can delve into a broader definition as to what it means as the conversation develops. But the two most important tenets of critical race theory are, number one, race is a social construction, right? Race and racial classifications, categories, whiteness, blackness, Asian American identity, Latinx identity, Asia, all these classifications are devices. Roa Benjamin, who writes on race and technology, writes that race is a technology that's used by those in power to bring about inequality and maintain or sort of like claim or monopolize economic and political interests in ways that benefit them. And then second, the second major tenet, and there's more that I'll discuss later on, is that race and racism are perpetually fluid and they shift in line with prevailing economic and political interests. And we can see that at play. We can see it at play during this moment of racial reckoning, where you see, I'm going to be brief. Now I'm not trying to construct any monolithic caricatures of any group, so feel free to hit me on the head later if I'm doing that. But it's not coincidental why specific elements of the white community are now embracing racial consciousness, Black Lives Matter, in these issues and these communities in ways that are unprecedented. The reason they're doing so is because it's aligning with broad economic and political and corporate interests. And that's the third tenet I want to delve into later on, is this notion of interest convergence that pioneering critical race theorist Derek Bell wrote about. So there's so much to say. I'm going to try to break it down as best I can as we evolve in the conversation.
Let me hit you with one quick follow-up, which is a lot of us are hearing about critical race theory from right-wing media.
Yeah.
We're hearing about it from parents who are upset about it. They're showing up with pitchforks or other weapons to school board meetings demanding that it not be taught to their babies, and that is some exercise in anti-Americanism or shaming of little innocent white babies. What is your interpretation of why that's happening, and do you have any counter narrative to explain what's actually going on in schools that might be triggering so much fear amongst this part of our society?
I don't want to get in trouble with Tizak, but I'm going to try to keep it real. So the parents of those parents were showing up with hoods and pitchforks decades ago. These new age parents are showing up with pitchforks, demonizing an entire discipline in a language of liberation. That's what critical race theory is, right? It's looking to demystify stereotypes, unlearn, undo these misrepresentations that have existed for so long about black, brown people, immigrants, indigents, women, LGBTQ people. So, but you're exactly right. The right is peddling this misinformation and this caricature as to what critical race theory is, sadly, to advance their cogent political interests, right? It's being used as a political weapon to galvanize and to mobilize elements on the right. And it's not novel, because in the past decade, my community, the Muslim community, there was a similar movement being brought by the same elements called the anti-Sharia movement, which looked to distort and disfigure what Sharia law meant in the same ways that these same elements are disfiguring and distorting what CRT means now. So it's part of the same playbook by the same people who once wore hoods, now they're wearing Patagonia jackets.
Yo, why we gotta drag Patagonia into this? It was such a good rant, and you drag my fam up in here. They're doing so much for the climate. Come on, man. Racists can be climate forward too. It's confusing. It's a confusing time. It's a confusing
Or
time.
Lululemon.
There we go. We can all drag Lululemon. No, it is comfy. It's soft. I'm having too much fun. Angela, could you do us a similar service? In your way, of course, but help this audience understand what we mean when we say NFTs. We see Jimmy Fallon with the Bored Ape and the yacht clubs, and so there's some headline level superficial understanding, but what's a non-fungible token? What's your introduction to this world, and why does it matter to you?
I was saying that it's such an incredible time to be alive, and just the convergence of all of these topics. And when I hear you speak, there's just so many perils in blockchain and this new technology, Web3. So how I got introduced into blockchain, but now it's termed as Web3, which is kind of the umbrella in which NFTs, DeFi, all of these acronyms fall under. I will describe them as the new lane of where the new traffic of information is running. So when we think about Web 1, we can think about dial-up. Can you guys, by raise of hands, remember dial-up? Okay, so we're all...
Show your age.
Okay, so there was a time of dial-up when you received your AOL CD and we started experimenting with the internet, which was quite new for all of us at that time. I was quite little. And then there was Web 2, which is the time where most millennials have partaken on, which is having the rise of Facebook, having the rise of the social networks, Twitter, Airbnb, Uber, and seeing the power of companies to be able to use social capital and be able to really move people through technology, right, and create these products that we all use. And then what this time, Web 2, it's so important for all of us is data. That we realize that every time you sign up for these apps, you are signing that little box that says that you've read all of these agreements, and then we don't really know what's being done with our data. We don't really know what has any of you ever read all of those letters by raising hands? Any? So, yes, read those contracts, always read the fine print. Most of us don't and haven't. So we've just kind of been giving our data away, and now obviously all of these tools have come in handy for us, right? It's allowed us to travel, it's allowed us to communicate. But now we're in this new time in history, this revolution. which falls under the fourth revolution, which is not just blockchain, but we're talking about Internet of Things, we're talking about the ways in which technology is really permeating and creating connections in all of the ways in which we communicate and really behave with companies, behave with each other. So I will get to NFTs. So for me personally, I again come from a background of being very philanthropy driven and also from an art background. I grew up mostly in Brooklyn, in New York, and Brooklyn was the place where Ethereum was born. So back in the day,
Wait, I didn't know that. It was born in Brooklyn?
yes.
They need to brand that. Ethereum, born in Brooklyn.
It was born in Brooklyn, New York.
Biggie and
So
Ethereum.
we had a lot of friends. So I had a lot of friends that were involved in Ethereum, and then they would talk about this new technology, and I was just so curious about it. And they had their first Ethereum summit in Brooklyn in 2016, and that was when they sold the first crypto kittens, which were the first ever NFTs. And I just remember seeing mostly white men talking about all this technology and seeing them bid on these pictures of these cats. At the time, I believe they sold for less than a Bitcoin back then, or around, actually it was way more than that. It was around $150,000 for a digital image made in Bitcoin at the time. And I thought, wow, what is going on here? So I started to inquire what is happening in this space, and then as an activist, caring for the planet is not the most profitable job in the world. So I was trying to think, okay, how can I learn a little bit more about this technology and use it to my advantage? So I bought into Ethereum back then, and I just started experimenting with it and trying to understand these lanes of information. So an NFT is a digital asset, basically. It's a stamp that verifies authenticity. To give you an example, let's say that you're checking into your flight, and they give you this QR code, which allows you to get into your flight. If I were to give you a screenshot of that and you try to use it, you probably won't get into the flight because it doesn't belong to you. That's what an NFT is. And an NFT is not just an image. It can be a video, it can be a song, it can represent an asset. So actually it has a really, the utility that this technology can have in our world is really exponential, and I don't think we're still kind of in the very early stages of this technology. And yeah, there's just so much to say about NFTs. Is there anything that's coming up for you?
What's coming up for me is the exclusion and the inclusion. You defining and describing the room you were in 2016 in Brooklyn, which is full of nothing but white dudes.
Yes.
In Brooklyn.
Yes.
Just want to say everyone was in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So there is opportunity, and creativity, and clearly a lot of wealth flowing through these new lanes. But you're applying them in, I think, some more interesting or different ways than what a lot of us are seeing on the news.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would say that most of these, race is such a complex subject because it is a construct that we've created, and certain industries there's just more access and more exposure to, certain races have more exposure to technology, to science, and I think that's why I am in blockchain, is because it's so exciting to think about more women and more people from emerging majorities, right, to join the conversation. So what I find so interesting about this technology right now is the possibility of financial freedom, or at least to even imagine and reimagine the concept of value. Because just like race, value is a construct that we've said, this has value, right? Like this dollar has value because it allows me to do X, Y, and Z. What if I were to say that the token, the utility token that this community creates has a value in this particular community, and that value stays with us? I think that the idea of questioning value is super interesting. As a woman and as a woman of color that grew up in a country that's so racialized, Also, when we talk about climate, right, and when we talk about climate solutions, one of the best thing that we can do is to educate women and to have more women taking financial decisions for their communities, because by nature women are more nurturing. So if more women have access to financial freedom, then they will be able to actually make better decisions. They're not going to spend their money buying a Lamborghini. They probably will think how they invest in their communities. So
Here's something that you're making me think of right now, which is quick kind of level set on, NFTs are digital assets. They allow you to own digital stuff. They're essentially records proving exclusive ownership at a certain time, unique to you. And it can apply to anything. So we see the art, we see the Bored Apes and all kinds of other stuff going very astronomical in terms of value. But the way that people organize around them, I think this kind of connects to a project I want you to go a little further on, that people build communities around these assets. And some of them is just to get rich, is just to watch the line go up to the right, but others is to coordinate their financial resources and fund projects in a model that's different from a business, different from government taxation, different from classic philanthropy, through these decentralized autonomous organizations. You ever heard of DAOs? That's kind of what that's about. You're doing dope stuff with DAOs that I think this audience should understand, and then we'll try to rope the CRT back into it, because I think there's a bridge to be built. How are you organizing to fund things related to all your climate activism and interests through DAOs and NFTs on the blockchain?
yeah, so anyone that has worked in philanthropy or fundraising, it's a really hard job. And then the more and more we're living in a world of crises, right? It's like it feels like we are playing catch up every day. There's a new crisis, a new tornado, a new virus, a new mass shooting, especially here in the United States. We're just in a constant state of crisis. So I realized that there's a few things that we can do in climate, right? Educate women, give them the voice, give them the power, and then reforestation, restoration. And when I was planting trees last year, I was working with a lot of indigenous communities in my home country. I realized that we need way more than planting trees. And just getting to plant 5,000 trees was super hard to get people to donate for that through a GoFundMe, and it was so exhausting. And when we talk about sovereignty and figuring out a way to become more resilient, there came a moment that I said, this is not working out. Fundraising from a foundation or asking for grants from a foundation that's being funded by ExxonMobil does not work. It's not coherent. So how can we actually become more resilient and more creative? So I thought, well, these NFTs are a great idea. What if we create a token that represents the impact of a project that's been done? So when I was up in the mountain in the rainforest, I got caught in this torrential rain for like 3 hours, and I couldn't do anything except just sit there and think. And then I love ancient words, and I came up with this word that I found this word called sisu. And sisu is a Finnish term that means gentle courage, intuition, and courage at the time of the unknown. It's like walking in a dark room and you can't see anything, but inside of your tummy you know that there's a light at the end of it. And I thought, wow, this is so beautiful. We need more climate resilience, because the communities that will be affected by climate, they're not counted in our society. Indigenous communities, elders, children, the trees, not many people care for them. So with Sisu, I thought, well, let's create a community. Let's create a decentralized community, a DAO that can actually be the umbrella for other climate projects and people like me, an activist, an artist. How can we support more projects like that? So we're still in very humble beginnings. We just launched an NFT collection, and at first I'm like, wow, we're gonna sell out. Nadia from Pussy Riot said that she will get one, and all the hype, right? Because there's so much hype and there's just so much smokes and mirrors in this new economy, because there's just anyway. So we thought, let's just sell some NFTs. And the cool thing about this is that when you receive a grant from a foundation, it takes months for you to get it. With cryptocurrency, it's so fast and it's traceable. Everyone can see the transaction. So there's no room for anyone to alter that data. And as we all know, when we talk about philanthropy, when we talk about impact, most people have lost hope because they don't know where their money's going. And they're afraid that it's not going to be managed well. So with decentralized communities, we can actually create new forms of governance where everyone that's invested in those ecosystems have a say and have a vote. And I'm not talking about the democracy that we've been sold, but it's actually one that we get to write and narrate. So that's...
Thank you. Colin, what happens when someone is educated through the lens of critical race theory? How does it change you? What do you see that you didn't see before? What do you understand about how the system operates that you wouldn't understand through a non-CRT lens? What's the goal?
Yeah. So CRT is not provocative in any way. It's embellished, and the way it's been politically sort of disfigured and caricatured goes against the spirit of what it's actually trying to do. All critical race theory is trying to do is to say race is salient to the construction of American law, and it's vital and it's formative in the way law is being advanced and pushed in the contemporary moment, and that's it. Right? So what CRT does is it says that race and racism is baked into the American legal system to perpetuate, not only perpetuate, but to establish the original racial inequalities that still exist today. So you're talking about, and I'm seeing the intersection of it, I was listening in, between NFTs and CRT. I'll identify one really, I think, fascinating convergence here. You're talking about valuation. We can think about racial identities being valued. So when people say white privilege and white supremacy, right, what that essentially means is that individuals who hold whiteness as a form of currency have access to specific things that individuals that are not white do not have access to, right? Generational wealth, networks, access to specific colleges and universities. That is part and parcel of whiteness and the valuation of racial identity. That's what critical race theory does. It provides you with this language to distill and dissect what's happening on a real-time scale with regard to race and racism. Not provocative at all, right? I hate saying it, but if you were to survey 10 white dudes, there's a far higher likelihood that these 10 white dudes went to an Ivy League school in comparison if you surveyed 10 black or brown dudes, right? That manifests racial privilege and the valuation of whiteness that has been denied to black and brown people since the establishment of this country. One quick example, because I don't want to talk too long, I'm really excited for a Q&A with all of you. 1 year after the Constitution was enacted in this country, the legislature passed an additional law called the Naturalization Act of 1790. What that law said was you had to be white to become a naturalized citizen of the United States. And at that time, whiteness was defined in far narrower terms. It meant white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, so religion was central to the definition of whiteness, right? Until 1952. That's 70% of this country's existence as a sovereign nation state. You had to be white to become a naturalized citizen. So what did that mean for people like me, right? From Egypt, people like him, from Lebanon, Latino people who had been here actually living in California, Aztlan before it was taken over, right, by white dudes in their manifest destiny, finding gold up north in the Bay Area, right? What did that mean? That we had to go before courts and civil court judges who were white men and persuade them that we fit within the definition of whiteness. So that is critical race theory. It's providing you with a language, it's providing you with the intellect, and it's providing you, so one of my favorite rappers is Mos Def, right? He has a brilliant album called Black on Both Sides. He has this lyric from a
so
song.
Brooklyn tonight. I'm loving it. Welcome to Brooklyn in the desert.
And Mos Def is Muslim, by the way, so things are coming together in a nice way. Yasin Bey, exactly. So Mos Def says in this song called Love, I used to speak the King's English, but caught a rash on my lips. That's what critical race theory is. We don't want to speak the status quo language of white supremacy. We got a new language that's going to break it down, deconstruct it, and rebuild it anew for marginalized people who have been denied access, denied right, and where our skin, our entire identities, and our histories have been devalued.
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful bridge. Thank you for helping us construct that and link these banks. There's a lot that you said. And I think there's an element of the history of the blockchain technology, particularly cryptocurrency, that ties so much into what you just dropped, Professor, which is the Bitcoin as the first coin. This white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto that you may have heard of and never read. I encourage you to try to read it. It's 9 pages long. And if you just start to walk through it, forget the technical part, just read it like an essay. It comes out during the height of the financial crisis. It comes out when the story that we inherited about value started collapsing. And we lost faith in these financial institutions, which sold us something which wasn't legitimate anymore. The books didn't balance. And they have built something so fraudulent that even the people who built it couldn't understand it anymore. It was too big to fail, but too complex to understand. And someone came up, still anonymously, with another system, another form of currency, and something that nudged towards self-determination, self-definition, self-sovereignty through financial language. And then folks iterated on that. Vitalik and the Brooklyn crew built Ethereum and made it programmable in a whole different way. And then we got NFTs and we got decentralized apps and all this stuff. But the spirit of rejecting the inherited narrative and writing with a new language, some new code that lets us express ourselves in new ways, there's a strong link there between the NFT and the CRT. So I really, you're the professor. I see all those law reviews coming in handy. I get that. You seem like you're about to say something, Angela, and then I want to bring the rest of the people in.
Yeah, no, there's just so many parallels in where we're at with critical race theory and the emergence of blockchain technology and Web3, because it's really an opportunity for communities that have historically marginalized. You know, when we talk about wealth, we talk mostly in the United States, generational wealth, right? People that inherited land that was taken from people that allow them to have status and be able to go to schools and have their grandparents, you know, inheritance, and that allows them to thrive and then be at the top of the chain. And right now with blockchain technology, we actually have an opportunity where absolutely anyone can get in. And when we talk about the financial system, right, like banking, credit reports, all of these things are ways in which the society has made us exclude us from the conversation, and with blockchain technology, we're actually seeing how people are rewriting those rules. And it's a great opportunity for all of us to just think about it. And right now, it's not very accessible because the people that have created it, they just speak a different language, and that's why it's so important for all of us to be part of it, right? And people think that you need to be technical to work in the space, and you don't. You know, we still need marketers, community managers, that data analysts, and it's a way to really take ownership and sovereignty. Sovereignty really means to be on. I think the root is to be held by the mother, right? So how can we actually use these to hold ourselves in a space of sovereignty outside of these systems of oppression and accessibility, right? There's a lot of communities, for instance, there's a case study for blockchain where people are gaming with Access Infinity. They were making more money by gaming and earning in blockchain than they did in their own currency in Asia. And they didn't have access to banks, so cryptocurrency became an alternative form of banking for communities that are not getting paid enough. And when we talk about impact, you know, I got into this because I wanted to pay the volunteers that are up in the mountains planting trees with me. It's like, how can we actually have a space of reciprocity? We have gotten used to a system that only takes, and I think with blockchain is an opportunity to think about it in a more holistic way. And I would love to, you know, invite you to see, inshallah, to see how we can actually weave these type of thoughts and really weave these together.
I just got rich, so I don't, when the mayor says he wants to ban capitalism, slow down for a little bit. I just got hood rich, so I'm trying to join. Can I say something really quick? Because I'm really quick.
Go for it.
So you know what critical race theory is? The fact that Ukrainians get round-the-clock media attention, but Palestinians doing the exact same thing get no media attention. Why? Because those are white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed bodies, and those are brown Muslim bodies holding Molotov cocktails, doing the exact same thing, but getting no media attention, right? Critical race theory is exposing that double standard and saying it's not okay.
I have a question for you.
Okay?
Do you think that, because I thought about this a bit, and I'm an immigrant, I'm a person of color, I grew up in Colombia, I went to school here in the United States. I lived in Paris when there was a change of presidency, and a lot of people thought I was Muslim. I actually studied history of Islam, a bit of that, and I really was fascinated because people thought I was Muslim. So I actually experienced the racism in France that a Muslim person will feel, and I was just like, this is not okay. So I have a lot of empathy for race in general, because it's just not fair to be treated differently by the color of your skin. But my question for you is, do you think that maybe when we continue to create this narrative of oppression and division and victimization and kind of highlighting the oppression, do we reinforce the narrative that of superiority and minority, and even the language that we use to talk about critical race theory, does that actually, instead of creating a counter-narrative of resilience and uplifting, does it actually do the opposite?
We have a new moderator on the panel. Live from the blockchain.
Yeah, I got a short two-word answer. Hell no. You know, for far too long, the stories and the narratives of inequality of marginalized people have been brushed under the rug, you know, under the sort of justification that, you know, we should live under colorblindness, and you're playing the victim, and you should focus on the positive. Hell, another hell, no. We gotta uplift these stories, humanize these voices, and amplify them, right? And I'm gonna be really quick. I'm an academic, and I never want to be an academic who just wrote in an ivory tower in these fancy law reviews. For me, it's really important to write in a way that is accessible to communities who don't get to go to law school, right? Who don't get to go to graduate school, who aren't reading the New York Times, who don't have access to these fancy foundations. When I became a law professor and I was writing, my mom couldn't understand the stuff I was writing. My brother couldn't understand the stuff that I was writing. So for me, whether it's, and I hate that word, man, victimizing, right? Nah, because we have been victims, right? In a language of miseducation, in a language of uplifting oppressed voices, in my opinion, is a language of liberation. I'm sorry I'm worked up. It's Ramadan. You know what I mean? I've been fasting all month. But I feel like I gotta keep it real.
I wish you had clearer and stronger opinions on this. Maybe we'll get to it in a minute. What we will get to, what we will weave in, is you. Throw your hands in the air if you want to add to this, if you want to challenge. Yes, and could you share your name if you're comfortable with that? And if you're in the area, or wherever you're from, what general area, not your address.
My name is Sarah, and I sort of am here, but sometimes I'm not.
I like the vagueness. Sarah's sort of here. but
Sarah's
sometimes-
changed the practice of writing a book in the desert, and it's abandoned her city, and it's not yet. But I really like it here, so anyway.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'm going to ask a similar question of you. So who is it that owns Bitcoin, and which NFTs have sold for the most money? Are they the white, racist, white nationalist NFTs, or have they gone to women and people of color?
Yeah, there's a few questions there. Who owns Bitcoin?
Like, who mostly has benefited from Bitcoin? Has it been women and people of color, or Mark Andreessen and billionaires?
I would say that not as many women have benefited from cryptocurrency because they haven't been included into the conversation. The language, I think, is so, and I really respect you for breaking down law into simple terms. A lot of the terminology and just the way in which this is presented, it just sounds like so many acronyms. People are just scared of it. So most women have not participated on
But
it.
it's not because that we've been excluded by design and intention to make sure that we continue white supremacy through our financial systems, endorsed by the same people who are basically putting the same money in and multiplying it by 10.
I don't think that's not true. I think there's some truth to that. Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of the people that are making these are not exposed to critical race theory. and that's why the conversations need to be, we should have more diversity in thought in it. So as of right now, I would say that yes, it's mostly white men that already are wealthy, making more money, and that's why I'm trying to get creative and support my artists, designers, architects, law students, anyone that really wants to understand about Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoin, I'm talking Web3 in general, to understand that, because we're still so early on that I think there's still an opportunity. If you want to own a Bitcoin, you don't have to buy an entire one. You can buy a fraction of that. You can buy $20 of Bitcoin every week that you can spend on your lattes.
Let me tap in on this one. I love the subtle fierceness of your question, Sarah.
Yeah.
And the math is showing that the same concentration of wealth that we have in US dollars, we have in cryptocurrencies by and large. I think the difference is in what Angela said. She said two key words to me: opportunity and early.
Is it early?
Absolutely.
Yes, I mean, the dollar is many hundreds of years old, and these cryptocurrencies are far younger. The adoption rate, the awareness of it, the number of people participating. I think about this in terms of just the web. I was around for Web 1, Web 2, and now Web 3. The level of participation by people who look like me at this era is so much higher. I learned about cryptocurrencies from Black people on Clubhouse. I was the only Black person in the room in 1995 when I was getting online on dial-up. So I was the only Black person in the room in 2005 when I was starting to go to these Web 2.0 conferences in South by Southwest. I'm like the later Black person in some of these rooms now. So there is no guarantee. Opportunities, very key words that we've been talking about here, are gonna come to pass. But I think there's an earlier chance to intervene and set the direction of this, so we're not just passengers in this car that other people are driving. We also have some of the hindsight of the harms from Web 2 that we don't have an excuse to ignore this time around. So the level of participation and the creative uses of these is what I'm very excited about personally and trying to encourage, so that it's not just, VC people playing the game again and running away with all this.
But the third piece of that, though, is also that there's just like undercurrent of the people who have designed this, and this is about exclusion by design and intention, is actually very anti-government. And the people that have traditionally actually benefited from the existence of government are women and people of color.
Depends on what year we're talking about.
I hear what you're saying, but I think you also hear the argument that making it laws existing are a good thing.
Yes, so, actually, when I went to the first Bitcoin conference back in 2017, I had just come back from being at the United Nations in a summit to talk about indigenous rights and how to further these ideas. And then I go to this Bitcoin conference and there's not a whole lot of women, and a man just touches my ass. Sorry, I was gonna say but it was so wrong. And at that moment, I left blockchain on 2017. I sold my Bitcoin at the time because the toxic masculinity at that moment was, they celebrated this conference by going to a strip club. I had just come from the UN. I'm like, this is not a place for somebody like me to be in. I came here because as an immigrant, when I came to the United States, all of my school records had to be revisited. And this high school wanted me to do an extra year when I was underwhelmed by what I was learning there. And blockchain at the time, I'm like, wow, if I actually have ownership to my records, if I were to move to another country or this school burns down and all of these papers burn down, who owns my identity? So I started to think about blockchain from those lenses. And when I came into this conference and I had this terrible episode, I'm like, never again I'm coming into these circles. Like, this is...
I'm so sorry.
Well, I am too, but I'm so glad that this happened because, it hasn't been a smooth ride for me to be in this industry. It's definite, and that's why I want to encourage more women, more people of color to be part of the conversation, because by design, yes, the people that are creating this are not thinking of us, but if more of us are engaged and are the invisible hand that's driving this new market, these new products and tools that will be created will have our voice and will take into account our needs. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Can I comment really quick?
I mean, I think the law professor should comment on that.
Your question is really important, and there's a sinister dimension to the intersection of NFTs and critical race theory that I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. So we're living in a moment of performative diversity. We're living in a moment of racial capitalism, where gatekeepers of these corporations, and I don't know anything about Bitcoin and that coin or whatever it's called, but what I do know is that corporations, especially at this moment, are very keen on tokenizing people of color and women and putting them in visible positions so they look inclusive, but the composition of those at the very top, right, remain very homogeneously white and homogeneously male. So this, and I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit, but this moment of like diversity in like the optics of inclusion mean nothing. They mean it's putting lipstick on a pig, right? If the gatekeepers, the leaders, the money are all white and male. So the Democratic Party and their this neoliberal sort of like messaging of diversity is entirely glossing over the structural inequities that still exist. And that's true for any corporation in America, and that's likely the case in this blockchain context. Y'all want critical race theory? I'm giving you critical race theory.
So what
All right,
are the
let's-
solutions? What are the solutions? How can we make this better? Because sometimes just pointing at the problem, how does that actually create
Well, there's
offer solutions?
look, there's analysis and then there's prescription, right? One thing to be mindful of, and this is what Frantz Fanon, really prominent post-colonial thinker, said. You never want to be a native informant. You never want to be you never want to be a cog in a machine that's oppressing your community by just uplifting one or two individuals within your community. So recognizing what the machine looks like is really critical before you enter the machine, right? That is a prescription. The second prescription is economic. It's structural. It's understanding that capitalism, in the way it's formulated, is flawed. That is a prescription, and unless we make that kind of headway, then we're just essentially recreating. These are all remixes. These are all like novel recreations of economic, corporate, and governmental inequalities that have existed since this country has become a sovereign nation.
But it doesn't have to be.
And that's what you should.
And we've always had the choice to intervene and change those systems. Laws can be good things. They can also be used to literally tokenize people, parcel them up into little slivers of value, and sell them down the river by law. Laws can be used to deny us access to capital. Laws can be used to make it harder for me to get a mortgage than somebody else. And a system built on different sets of rules and permission that allow for cooperative economics through a whole nother literal currency is an opportunity as well. None of this is guaranteed, but I think the opportunity is giving us to even interrogate, even through your lens, interrogate the financial system through the CRT lens with an NFT forecast. Right? Like it's not an either or kind of thing.
So I just want to say something. I think that you
Yes.
you really enjoy learning about DAOs, because decentralized autonomous organizations is a way to organize communities without leaders. Where we've seen the problem as an activist, where the projects that I'm supporting are projects where most climate activists are getting killed for doing their work. With the technology is a double-edged sword. You can use anonymity to trade drugs, or you can use anonymity to protect people that are doing good work. So everything has a double-edged sword, and with DAOs and decentralized autonomous organizations, right now it's obviously very utopian, and we're still figuring out the use cases of these, but how interesting is to actually have movements without a head figure. Because right now what we keep on seeing is these head figures, and I completely agree with you. The reason why I'm here right now and I'm not in Amsterdam today is because I thought that having this conversation with all of you would be way more meaningful than me being the Latin check, climate check person in this mostly white or maybe, a setting. And it's not about just whiteness, it's about the diversity of thought. So with DAOs, you actually can create and write governance that can use a lot of this critical race theory, where you encourage people to participate in the making of smart contracts, that in the contract you can write what the values of that community, and the trust won't be put in a person that can be bribed, that through their own lenses of their experiences, their biases, their political standings will make a decision, but it will be actually taken autonomous by an entire community.
We got time for one more. I saw your hand go up. Do you still have something you want to ask or add?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
First of all, Angela, I want to draw attention to something that you kind of glossed over, and I really appreciate it. I want to make sure I understand it. You were saying that you're using the different forms of currency in order to pay the women in the countries of Colombia and et cetera. Isn't that an opportunity for educating them as well in terms of all the things that encompass it and all the things that they can become and do with it?
100%, because it's always a holistic way of approaching interdisciplinary thinking, right? Design thinking, circular economies. It's not just, I'm not trying to do charity and just throw money at things. I'm trying to build with people. And for instance, right now, the one project that we're doing is a honeybee project with the indigenous community of the Arahuacos in the Sierra Nevada. And you know, if we talk about cryptocurrencies, they first also need to have internet, they need to have a computer, they need to have a level of understanding, right? So this is just an opportunity to talk about having solar power, right? Like how
It's a breakthrough for them, right?
it's a breakthrough to them, right? That they actually don't, you know, if one person in our community or of our project, right, like this young 20-year-old girl, she messaged me, she's like, I don't want to work for Amazon. I really want to work with these indigenous communities. Can I help you? And I said, absolutely. And she's there right now with the communities, and how we've done it is, you know, we sell the NFTs, we receive the Ethereum, we send the Ethereum to this volunteer, she changes it into the currency of pesos, and then with that money, she's able to give it to these communities. Right now, we're working with younger people, and ideally we can continue working with younger leaders that can actually be the voices for these communities, right? To be part of these conversations and be included. So this is just the beginning of bigger conversations. And again, I'm really grateful to be here because I love this holistic way to thinking about these subjects, right? Like we are an ecosystem. We can't just think about one solution. We have to think holistically, and I think with crypto, with blockchain, is an opportunity to think that way.
Y'all, we could clearly go on for a long time, and we could use the heat generated by this discussion to power geothermal renewable energy to make the desert more sustainable. But we are running out of time. So thank you both. Thank you all. The answer is yes and maybe. The answer is we need to know the history and the truth and have this honest, raw, unfiltered lens on how we got here and the stuff that's still embedded in the system so that we can spot it as we build new systems and not re-embed it. Don't just remix, but create something new and better. I could go on for a long time myself, but I am also out of time. Thank you, Mobius. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I appreciate you having all of us. Give it up for Professor Khaled, give it up for Angela, I'm Valentine. This is Mobius, this is the president.
Round of applause, please, for our panelists. So again, thank you all for coming out. This concludes the programming for the Mobius Conference. We've had just an amazing couple of days of, the Mobius concept is that we're all on the same team. We're all going to the same place. The meshing of different perspectives of the locals and those visiting us. But please don't let it end here. Please take these discussions home with you. Please take them to work with you. Talk to your neighbors, talk to students. The way this works, the way it gets better, is that we build from here, right? So we're gonna stay here for another hour. There's more drinks. We have more music from DJ Femme. Again, thank you very much for coming out, and hopefully we see you again next year.